Over the last 10 years, healthcare costs have skyrocketed by, get this, 230%. If you have Medicare Parts A and B, you know there's still out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles and copayments, and they really add up. But here's some good news. Medi-Share 65 Plus is designed to fill in those gaps and help protect you from rising healthcare costs. At only $99 per month up to age 75, you get peace of mind at a price you can afford. And Medi-Share is trusted, too. It's been around 30 years. It's not some big impersonal thing. It's a community of people helping each other, business owners, pastors, retirees. People love it. Medi-Share 65 Plus just makes sense. To learn more, give them a call. They're great to talk to. They'll offer to pray with you each time you call, too. Call now. 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE. Every weekday, strengthen your family and your faith with Family Talk.
I had the same brain when I was at the bottom of the class that I had at the top of the class. Exactly the same brain, but a different attitude. What does that tell us about our responsibility to develop the intellect of the people in our spheres of influence?
Don't miss Family Talk with Dr. James Dobson every weekday at 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. Central on AFR. We see and hear about the big public issues happening in our nation's capital, but what about the things that happen behind the scenes? That information can give us the whole story and help shape our opinions. That's why you need to listen to Washington Watch Weekend with Tony Perkins. He and his guests will give you all parts of the Washington news from a conservative Christian perspective. Catch Washington Watch Weekend Saturdays at 5:05 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central, and Sunday mornings at 3 Central on AFR.
How did the first pilgrims celebrate Thanksgiving? A look at the first Thanksgiving prayer provides a great reminder of the holiday. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr with another Stand in the Gap Minute. History records that Governor Bradford recorded the first Thanksgiving proclamation 3 years after the Pilgrims settled in Plymouth. One key phrase of his prayer records that God has granted us the freedom to worship Him according to the dictates of our own conscience. And while many today view Thanksgiving as just a holiday to eat turkey and watch football, its origin celebrated our nation's freedom to worship God. Let me encourage you to reconnect with this original Thanksgiving prayer. As you gather for the holiday with loved ones, remember to express appreciation for America's religious liberties. More than ever, we need to remember our religious freedoms and express them. May God continue to bless America as we seek to worship Him. Join us for more biblical resources at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net.
This is Real Truth for Today. Podcasts of the program are available on the podcast page at afr.net. Now, back to Pastor Jeff Shreve.
Welcome back to the program. Pastor Jeff here. We're talking to attorney Bradley Pierce, president of the Foundation to Abolish Abortion and the co-executive producer of the series Abortion Free, the docu-series. And Bradley, let me ask you this. With regard to this series, you said it was 6 30-minute programs. What's the purpose of the docu-series?
It's to open the eyes of the church. We believe that abortion in our country is really the result of people of God not being salt and light the way that we should be. And, some of that is because, personal sin and apathy. Some of that's also just because of ignorance. We don't really know what exactly is going on or how we should be thinking about it biblically. Many pastors are not shepherding the flock on this issue like they should be. And so the purpose of the docu-series is to open the eyes of Christians to see, here's what's really going on, here's why it's going on, here's what the church should do about it. And it's also, we want pastors to watch it too, that, hey, here's how we should be teaching and putting the flock on this issue.
How do people watch it, Bradley?
You can go to abortionfree.com and access it there. Or you can go directly to our YouTube channel, the Foundation to Abolish Abortion, and watch it there.
All right, very good. As you've been working on this, let's talk about the church. What do you see kind of across the board? Do you give the church a passing grade or a failing grade as it deals with the issue of abortion?
Well, I'm going to give it a failing grade for the, since 1973 and even before on this issue, that we have not been approaching it the way that I believe God says to approach it. And, like the passage that you read, we need to be speaking up. And we've got a genocide going on in our country. There's over 70 million, aborted in this country that we know of. They can even count, many other areas where embryos and babies are being discarded. But those are just actual, reported abortions. And yet, many of us have been asleep about it. Many of us have been apathetic. And even the way that we have tried to approach it legislatively or politically has really denied the power of God and what He says to do about it. For example, God says repeatedly in the Old Testament and repeatedly in the New Testament that God does not show partiality, and we are not to show partiality. You shall not show partiality in judgment. And what He means by that is not like, don't go part ways. What partiality means is judging people based not upon the merits of their case or the facts of the case or what they've done, but judging them based upon some external factor like, oh, you're white or you're black or you're male or you're female, or in this instance, you're born or you're not yet born. But even the bills that the pro-life movement's been writing and that we've been supporting and donating to and voting for, today's politicians, they almost all show partiality. They do not treat a person in the womb and protect them with the same laws as they protect people outside the womb. And so that's what, so we can see principles, we undermine our own arguments.
Yes.
And we can
You can come out the room and ask us for something.
Okay.
But what you need, honey?
Can I have my stuff washed? There's a zipper on the bottom. Like I need bags or something, and then
Bradley, as
they
you've been
can
dealing with
be
this
washed.
this issue for a long time.
What?
I need my laundry washed.
What is the
I
argument?
mean, they're in there.
from the
Last
other
time they took
side?
it off the door.
Because
But you can
seems to
unzip the
me
bottom
very
and put it
clearly
in a
that
plastic bag.
No,
or
you
something.
I'll bring you a bag. You do that. We
common
don't do that.
sense tells
Yeah,
us
just bring
that
us the
life
laundry and
begins
we'll
at conception.
Send it down when you're done.
What are the
Well, what do I do now? It's just sitting there. I don't know what to put it in.
Come on, if you got your laundry, just give it to us now.
But yet they keep on and on with that.
Oh,
But
boy.
what kind of
Was
an
that
actual
laundry?
argument? You're an attorney. so
Okay.
you-
I have 2 bags.
That's fine.
What
Okay.
argument do they make to try and tell us that abortion is good and
Thank
right
you.
and fine and scientific and makes sense?
Yeah, well, for a long time it was.
You know what I need to tell them?
They would argue.
No, I need the bags back.
So,
Of course.
I don't want it to fall
Is your
out.
name on the bag?
No.
I'll just let them know.
I mean, need to. Oh, have the bags back soon. Like, or.
Whoa, that's why I asked you to put it. I was gonna give you a bag to put it in the bag. So you can get to her since she's already. You wanna do that?
The arguments have shifted. Many have conceded that yes, this is human, yes, this is life, yes, this is human life. But the rights of the mother trump the rights of the child. It's kind of a might makes right. The mom is bigger, and stronger, and she gets to decide. So, the my body, my choice is, our counter argument is like, well, no, there's another body in there, but at the top level of choice, thinking today is like, actually, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that there's another body in there. That body is my body. It's kind of like, it's my slave, my choice. And so by dehumanizing, they get away with that. But even by not doing that, say, okay, yeah, they are human. But this human's rights trump that human's rights. And this human's rights not to be pregnant. for God, you know, go even beyond that. And
Yeah.
that's even more dangerous.
So Bradley, for the person that says, "Well, I'm pro-life, but I'm not to abolish abortion," you're too extreme, and so I don't want to be that extreme. Basically, that person, I know people are going to be different across the board, but that position is going to say, Bradley, your position can never work. It can never win. So if we go your way, we lose across the board. Am I right in kind of framing that? Is that how they're looking at the abolish abortion position?
There's certainly people who make that argument. Yeah. And it's what I say is look at what I've done for the past 51 years. How are we doing in the country today? Not just on this issue, but across the board, the moral fabric of our country. How are we doing? How does that work? And it hasn't. Yeah, we have, like I said, we have more abortions now than we ever did. That's why whenever we tell someone don't abort your baby, well, who am I? Who am I to tell you what to do with your body or your baby? Well, I'm nobody. But God says. But a lot of the pro-life movement, even today, in fact, more so today, a lot of it tries to argue, well, yes, many of us are Christians, but don't start bringing religion into it. We need to just argue from science and logic and things like that, and all those things are well and good, but they're secondary. Ultimately, abortion is wrong because God says that it's wrong, and God then tells us what to do about it. And whenever we say, "No, God, we're smarter than you, we know better than you," that's not going to work, God. We're going to do it our way. We're going to use man's wisdom and not God's wisdom. That's where we get where we are as a country, not just on this issue, but on every issue. And that's been how we treat every issue, and we totally jettison God from the political conversation altogether.
All right, so Bradley, how are you treated in terms of your position? Because it seems to me that if you're pro-life, you would say, okay, Bradley and I are on the same page. I don't believe that his strategy is going to help us move the ball down the field, but I believe what he believes. That, in my mind, that seems like that should be anybody that's pro-life. But as I've been reading, it's not like that. Why is it not like that? How can you be pro-life and be a part of a pro-life movement, but not want to eradicate abortion?
Well, like I said, a lot of it is pragmatism, wanting political power, and right now, it's not a politically popular thing. Even in the Republican Party, that in the National Republican Party at least, the states are different, but on the national scene, it's not popular. And so, by watering it down, then we can help maintain some of the political power. There's also people that just genuinely, I would say, approach it from an unchristian perspective. They may be Christians, but they're not bringing biblical thinking into how they deal with issues. And they come into this with all people are basically good mentality. And so these women, that are doing this, or even the men, helping them. They're ignorant, they're weak, they've been lied to by the abortion industry for many years, and they shouldn't be held accountable. And it's like, well, no. Ultimately, yes, there are people who are forced to abortions, and they shouldn't be prosecuted or anything like that. There are people who are affected into it, but the number one reason for abortion is sin. is that in our sin nature, in bondage to sin, separated from God, we choose death rather than life, and that's why we need Christ. That's why we need the gospel. That's why we need a savior. It's because of that sin. And so, but a lot of organizations and pro-life leaders act like, no, everybody thinks they're good. They just do bad things when they're, forced or pressured into it.
Right.
So it's not really it. And so we need to come at it and viewing humanity and human nature the way that God does.
Well, we've heard for a long time, Bradley, as you mentioned, President Trump initially was, I'm against abortion except in the cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. And rape is a horrible, awful thing, but that doesn't mean you murder the child. Incest is a horrible, awful thing, but that doesn't mean you murder the child. Let's talk about life of the mother, because we heard that from the left, from Kamala Harris, as she would tell these stories about women who died because they couldn't get an abortion and they were, in dire straits. How common is the life of the mother situation?
Well, and like you were just kind of saying, it's still murder. The life of the mother situation, though, it's not. No one's murdering anybody in that kind of situation. In a true medical situation where you have a mom who wants her baby.
Waiting for a call back. Hi.
Hi, I gotta go get your insulin because
Oh,
there's
yeah.
only like 10 units in it.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's stupid. So I'm gonna go get a different one, okay?
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Sometimes that may result in the baby. That's something that that's not murder, right? That's
Right.
trying to save as many lives as you possibly can. So to me, that's not an exception to abortion, and that's what most pro-life doctors
It
do.
is.
That's what morals would say. Like that's not an abortion. It's the intentional taking of human life.
Yeah, an ectopic pregnancy would be the same thing. That's not an abortion.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so today, you see the pro-abortion side, they're trying to say, oh, look, it's a pro-abortion, women are dying, and that's not the case. That in the one case that they pointed to in Georgia, it was because, this woman did perform an abortion that was legal for her to do in that state, and then, there's some complications when the hospital did treat her. There's a lot of fear mongering going on that, hey, if you don't let women murder their babies, the women may die. And
Right.
that's not happening. Women died, even just saw someone I follow, post yesterday, sadly, that she was miscarrying, and she said, hey, I just want to tell you, that I was able to get care. The hospitals weren't turning me away saying, no, we can't help you, because the pro-life laws won't let us. No, she got care, she got help, and all that's still totally allowed. The bills a week are out, the abolition respect bill, and even under the pro-life law, women who are having experience to still get they need.
Well, Bradley, thank you so much for being my guest today. Tell our listeners how they can connect with you.
Yeah, they can reach out to us at the Foundation to Abolish Abortion at FAA.life. Or if they're in Texas, like you and I are, they can connect with us at Abolish Abortion Texas, AbolishAbortionTX.org, and they can watch the docuseries, abortionfree.com.
All right. Thank you, my friend. God bless you. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving with your wonderful family. I still marvel 11 kids. That I had 3, and that's a handful, but 11 would be. So God bless you. Thanks for listening to Real Truth for Today. And when we come back from the break, we're going to be taking your calls 888-589-8840. That's 888-589-8840. If you have a question, if you have a comment, I would love to hear from you. So give me a call and let's talk.
AFA Action takes attacks on the family seriously. The enemies of the family constantly employ new tactics to try to sneak past our radar. They know if we stand together, their evil plans will fail. Your gift to AFA Action allows us to stay vigilant against their onslaught. And if you give this month, you'll receive access to the Cultural Institute video When Your Faith is Illegal by Frank Harper on AFA Stream as our thanks. You can make your gift today at afaaction.net.
Is God calling you to ministry? It's time to multiply your capacity for ministry with an affordable degree. The Bachelor of Arts in Christian Ministry at Wesley Biblical Seminary is the degree for you. When God called you to ministry, He called you to preparation. This degree is the education that you need to put all the pieces together for an amazing life of ministry. You will graduate with a confidence for ministry that is backed up by your competence in the scriptures, theology, and ministry. Come learn with a trusted seminary that will help you become a faithful leader. Learn more at wbs.edu.
As Christians, how can we even begin to impact others when we live in a culture where truth is relative? It all starts with God's Word. Join us for Activate Summit 2025 at Cadence Bank Conference Center in Tupelo, Mississippi, June 12th through the 14th, 2025. The theme is Biblical Bedrock, building on the authority of Scripture, and it's designed to help you acknowledge the Bible's authority and submit to the clear teaching of Scripture. Hear from Abraham Hamilton III.
The Lord has planted us here so that we make our space better.
Ed Battagliano.
We use those kind of terms, be the hands and feet of Jesus. What would Jesus do if He were here?
And Alex McFarland.
God created because it was His will.
The main sessions are for ages 13 and up, while Activate Kids is a separate track for ages 6 through 12. Register for Activate Summit 2025 by visiting activate.afa.net/summit. Enter code EARLYBIRD20 at checkout for 20% off tickets before January 1st.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten. Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
If you'd like to contact Pastor Jeff, email pastorjeff@fromhisheart.org. Now, back to Real Truth for Today with Pastor Jeff Shreve.
Welcome back to the program. Pastor Jeff here. We have been talking to Bradley Pierce and about the issue of abortion. He's president of the Foundation to Abolish Abortion and the co-executive producer of Abortion Free, the docuseries. So I encourage you to check out that documentary series. He said it's 6 episodes, 30 minutes long, and just really details what is going on in America regarding abortion. And since Roe v. Wade, I think a lot of Christians get the idea, okay, we won that great victory and now the battle's over, but it's not over. And we do need to speak up, as it says in Proverbs 31, open your mouth for the
It was mid-December. I was only 17 at the time, and every year just before Christmas week, my mom had to go on a 3-day business trip for work. Being an only child that lived just with my mom, I'd spend these days that she was gone home alone. Usually she'd leave just before winter break, so I'd be in school for most of the day. But this year she left the same day that our school let out for the holidays. I had the house to myself and wanted nothing more than to stay inside and chill all day. Our city was going through somewhat of a snowstorm, so I couldn't really leave the house. I made some of the food that was left for me and found a new movie to watch.
30 and 30.
I had to
okay?
pause it several times
I'll
throughout
wait
the
here,
couple
it's
hours
safe
though,
here,
because
so
the
I'm
wind
gonna
and snow would suddenly pick up and
I
get
have to
really
lift my
loud.
shirt up.
It seemed
So you
like
know.
every
yeah,
time I
okay.
looked
I have a bra
outside,
and
the
underneath.
weather was
Okay.
worse. Then, around 7 or 8, someone was walking up to the front door. I could hear their footsteps kicking against the
I wonder if I'll
snow.
get to work
They
30
coughed
hours.
several times as they
Oh,
slowly
yeah.
It'd
made
be
their
nice
way
if I
out to
can
the
have that much
porch.
time with the bus.
I didn't
Yeah.
have a clue
You
who it
can,
could be. I paused everything
You know they
and
have a
looked at the
thing
door,
that's like the
waiting for them to
LCD
knock
that they
or ring the
come,
doorbell.
and it works like Uber.
As more time
Yeah,
passed,
calling
though,
in Mexico,
I
I
could feel
couldn't figure out
myself
the
getting
application.
nervous as something didn't feel right. I want to say I waited 3 or 4 minutes, not hearing anything, before I went up to the door and looked outside. Nobody was there. I could see the footsteps coming right up to the door, then going back the way they came. I was really confused how clearly I heard them walk up, but
Well, if I
somehow
have to
I
stay here a
didn't
few
hear
months
them
if I get a
leave.
job, so I don't like
Also,
just
with the
leave it.
snowstorm outside,
Unless something
what reason
happens here
could
and I can
someone
tell
have to
them.
come up to my
Right.
house?
Like if I can't.
I think the only reason I could
Survive here, I'll
settle
tell them
on
I'm
was
an
that the snow made it difficult to see, and they mistook my house for theirs. Maybe they realized once they got up to the porch,
I'm trying
they
to get
didn't
an
want to alarm
apartment
anyone,
in Berea.
so
Another
they
one called me
quietly
back,
left.
but
Yeah.
It's
I'm not ready to
probably
pay
a
the
bit of a
application
stretch,
fee right now
but I guess it
anyway.
was possible.
It wasn't that expensive. I thought
After
it
a
was.
while, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the situation.
How much
I was
was it?
more caught up worrying
$40.
about the
I
storm.
thought it was $200.
The
Maybe it
power
was
cut
after
out
other
a few
fees. I don't
times,
know.
lasting for several minutes
The other one I
before it
want
came back
in
on.
Berea is
Because of that,
like
I couldn't really
$385
watch
or
TV or
something.
anything. So I just sat on the couch and
I was
scrolled
supposed
on
to
my
get some returns
phone.
back, but I don't have that much.
It was maybe around 11 when, through
I
the
have like
harsh
$20,
wind, I heard a
$25.
thump against the house.
I wanted to buy a salad.
I initially
Yeah.
ignored it,
I'm not,
but only a
so,
few moments
I don't
later,
have
the
much.
power cut out again.
I mean, I've done that before. Gone to
Thinking
zero.
the thump might have
I don't
caused
want to do
it,
that.
I got up. It sounded like it was from the side near the kitchen, so I turned my phone light on, then walked over and looked
I can
around.
throw all this stuff away.
Oh, can you?
I thought
Not
it was
this. Well, this
probably
stuff
just
goes in
stuff I
the.
gotta go.
Do you need
that
my
the power
pen
shut
too?
off right after I heard the thump,
Thanks.
but I just wanted to be sure nothing happened.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything, and I started to walk away. Hey! I jumped and looked at the back door, seeing a man standing against the other side. The back porch light wasn't on, so he was mostly covered by the dark. I could only see his face peering in at me. Hey, kid, would you get the door for me? It's freezing out here, he said, putting his hand on the door and trying to open it. My head wasn't fully grasping the situation yet, and I kind of just stood there and stared at him. Kid, get the door, please. Something gave me a bad feeling. I knew better than to trust this guy, even though it was a blizzard outside. The man started coughing, and I started to back up, and the man's face instantly fell into a disturbing frown. Open the fucking door, he yelled, banging his fist against it several times. I ran back to the couch and got my phone. I then stood in the hallway and watched the man as I dialed 911. My phone was struggling to hold service and kept dropping the call, but after a few tries, I was able to get through long enough to ask for help. The man at the door continued to yell at me and hit the door, but eventually ran off. I'm assuming the snowstorm caused some trouble for the police, as they didn't make it until nearly 30 minutes after. I told them what I could, and I called my mom to let her know what happened. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been stalking me and trying to guilt me into letting him in, or he could have actually been in need of help, although it's unlikely. I never saw him again after that night, though.
I can't believe I caught that on camera.
I had visited my family for the holidays and was driving back home. The trip in total was about 10 hours, which I split into 2 drives on the way up. But on the way back, I decided to power through it in one long drive. Around the halfway point, snow started coming down. It wasn't too much, so I wasn't worried about it. However, it got worse as I kept driving. Once I was 3 hours away from home, it was pouring down pretty heavily, and with the sun going down as well, it definitely was not ideal. There were almost no other cars out though, which is the only reason I decided to keep driving. The snow made it harder, but I was still on track to be home by the end of the night. It was just after the sun had fully set, and about 30 minutes out from the nearest town I just passed through, that I noticed a car on the road ahead of me. Their headlights were the only light on the road, in the middle of the blanket of snow covering everything else. And as I got closer, it was clear that they were stuck, or at least not moving. Their car was sideways on the road, with their hazard lights flickering, and a man was standing out in the cold next to it. Obviously, with the snow and cold, I really didn't want to stop, but it seemed I didn't have a choice. His car was blocking most of the road off that was paved. I parked just behind him. The man immediately started waving at me and walked up to my window. My car slid and got stuck there. Can you help me push it out? He spoke slowly, like his English wasn't the best, but hoping I could get back on the road as soon as possible, I agreed to help him. The car didn't really look like it was in too much snow, so maybe just a little push might actually be enough. I threw my hat and gloves on, then got out. The wind hit my face, and snow instantly soaking me made me wonder why the guy even got out of his car and didn't just call for help. My face and hands were already getting numb, so I hurried to the back of his car and waited for him to get his gloves. It was too dark to see anything through the windows, and after a little bit of standing back there waiting, I looked around to see what was taking him so long. He was still leaning into the front seat, as if looking for his gloves, but I thought I heard him talking. A second later, he came back out and looked at me. Were you talking to me? I asked. He looked concerned, but said he was just talking to himself. He smiled, then walked around to the back to help me push. I couldn't help but feel like something had changed, though. His whole demeanor and the situation just felt different. Although I didn't hear what he said, it didn't really sound like he was talking to himself. But if someone else was in the car, then why was he out here alone and asking for my help? All these thoughts came rushing through my head, and I guess for a few seconds, I was kind of spaced out. So much so that I didn't notice the man staring at me. His smile had dropped, and he had an eerie look in it, like they were hollow and lifeless, completely opposite of what he looked like before. I didn't even hesitate, beginning to hurry back to my car. Just then, several doors from the car I was just behind opened, and 3 more men got out, rushing toward me. I sprinted into my driver's seat, and thank goodness I left my car on, because I put it hitting one on the way out. I was terrified of possibly getting stuck in the snowbank, as the path around their car was very thin, but thankfully I made it around and was able to get away. I put in a report with the police at the closest town, but there were never any updates as far as I know. I'm assuming the men weren't really stuck and probably left right after I did. I don't know what those men were up to. Of course, I have my guesses, but if I had stayed and didn't leave right when I did, who knows where I'd be. It was late November, and this was the first snowfall of the season. It wasn't supposed to be anything too much, just a couple inches of snow. I got home from work around 8, and by then the snow had already started. I heated up some leftover pizza and stayed downstairs for a couple hours. Around 10, I went upstairs to my bedroom, sitting at my desk with my laptop. Before I could even open up something to watch, I heard something right above me. It sounded like a thud in the ceiling. I thought it was likely the snow weighing down on the roof and was probably nothing to be concerned about. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned at all, though. This was my first winter at this house, and it wasn't in the best shape, so part of me was a little worried about any possible leaks or other problems that could happen with the snow. I tried to not think about it too much and continued looking for something to watch, but then it happened again. A thud resonating through the ceiling. I looked up, and the thuds continued, sounding almost in a straight line across the ceiling. I was genuinely worried now. I got up and grabbed my winter jacket, then hurried out the front door and looked up at the roof. Unexpectedly, the side of the roof that my bedroom was under, there was no snow on it. It had all slid off and fell into a pile in front of the house. I looked at the other side of the roof, and the snow was still there. I then looked at my neighbors' homes, and all of them still had snow sitting on their roofs, like normal. The way the snow had fallen off just one side of my roof didn't seem natural, like something was either wrong with my roof or something else had made this happen. Probably whatever those thuds were that I was hearing. With no more answers to find outside, and my whole body starting to shiver from the cold, I walked back to the front door. I opened it and hurried inside, stomping my boots on the doormat. When I looked up, though, my heart almost stopped. There were puddles of water going across the hallway. I stayed still and looked around, seeing water going through the living room and even up the stairs next to me. It only took me a second to see a boot print in one of the puddles, and I immediately turned right back around and headed out the door. I stood by the road and called the police, shivering as I tried to tell them my situation. About 30 seconds into the call, I saw something move past one of the windows in my bedroom, and moments later, a figure stood behind the glass, looking down at me. They only stayed for a second, then backed away. I didn't see anything else the rest of the time that I waited for the police. As I was waiting, though, I put together most of the pieces in my mind. Someone had made it up on the roof, making the snow fall as they walked across. There were several windows they could have gotten from that I honestly had no idea if they were locked or not. When police arrived, they didn't find the intruder inside anymore, but they basically confirmed my theory. There were multiple trees going over top my house that anyone could easily climb, and with the windows being accessible, it made for an easy target. At least the officers think that that's the reason they broke in, just because I was an easy target. Nothing was missing though, and the way the shoe prints went through the whole house felt eerily like them looking for me. What's crazy is that I must have gone outside to check on the roof at the exact time they got in through the window. If I was any later, I would have been face to face with them. Or if I'd gone back inside sooner, they might have not left tracks through the house yet for me to immediately notice. It's been nearly an entire year since this, and so far, nothing else has happened. Maybe it was just a one-time attempt, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe with all the uncertainties of what happened that night. Welcome to Get Sleepy, where we Hello, my friend. What?
I used to occasionally deliver for DoorDash on the weekends. This happened about a year ago, and at the time, DoorDash was new to my area. Not many people used it, but if you worked at the right times, you could still make well above minimum wage. It was a Friday night, and I got a request in the app to deliver to a house around 8 miles away. The house was on a deeply wooded back road, with absolutely no street lights. Like, literally, if you turn your headlights off at this time of the night, you were completely blind. I delivered to a house in this area once before, but that was when it was light out, which, trust me, is a way different scene. I didn't have much for phone service, so it was difficult to find exactly where I needed to be. But after a while, I finally found the place.
Hey!
The house seemed pretty similar to a lot of the other houses in the area. Secluded looking, and right on the edge of being able to comfortably call it abandoned. I pulled up to the house, and because of the limited visibility, I decided to keep my car's headlights on while I dropped off the food at the door. But to do this, I had to keep the keys in the ignition, and so I did. I figured it wouldn't be the end of the world if I left my car running for an extra 30 seconds. I took the bag of food to the front door. I knocked a few times, and waited about 20 seconds when my phone went off. I was getting a call from a blocked caller ID. I decided to answer it in case it had anything to do with the food I was delivering. It was some man who sounded completely normal. He explained how he was the one who placed the DoorDash order, and he then asked me if I could just bring it to him around back. I was already sketched out as is, and so I told the guy no way. If he wanted his food, he needed to come to me up front. But to that, the line just went dead. I told myself I'd wait at the front door for one more minute, and if this guy didn't show up, I was just gonna leave. Maybe 30 seconds passed, and the guy did show up. The front door opened, and I looked at the dude. He was wearing a black ski mask, and was just standing there looking at me. I held out the food, but he made no reaction. That's when the guy yelled out, "All right, now." Right as he said this, 3 men, also wearing ski masks, came sprinting out from around the back of the house towards me. My flight reaction kicked in immediately, and I ran straight to my car. I opened the door, put it in drive, and had the pedal to the floor in no less than 2 seconds. The men were able to hit my car a good amount of times before I was able to drive off. With what? I don't know, but something strong enough to break my back passenger side window and make a few other dents. Not even a minute into driving off, and I got 2 back-to-back calls from a blocked caller ID that I can only assume were both from the same guy. I let both calls ring until they stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably and still struggling to regain my composure. But after a few minutes, I calmed down enough to call the police and report the incident. And that was that. I don't know what ended up happening, and I genuinely don't want to know. I've tried to distance myself from the whole situation as much as possible. It's beyond terrifying for me to imagine what those guys had planned for me that night. A part of me thinks it was just to rob me, but another part of me thinks they wanted to kidnap me, or worse. This happened back in 2019, on a Friday night in January. I had just gotten back from work, and was honestly way too tired to make my own food. I always heard good things about food delivery apps, and so I figured that night was the perfect night to finally download one and try it out. I just downloaded the first one that showed up. I then made an account, placed an order at a semi-nearby restaurant, and turned on Netflix to watch while I waited for it to arrive. Now, it's worth mentioning that on this night in particular, there was a lot of snow on the ground. The app said the delivery would take around 20 minutes, but I figured that didn't account for the terrible driving conditions. I honestly assumed it would probably take double that. I can't remember exactly how much time had passed, but it finally got to a point where I figured I'd just forget it and cancel the order. But right before I did, I got a message from the driver. Word for word, the message read, "Can't find your house. What's your personal phone number?" Now, you gotta remember, I had just downloaded the app that night, so I didn't know if it was common or not for drivers to ask for their customers' personal phone numbers. But I ended up giving it to him anyway. Around 10 minutes later, he would contact me, but not over a phone call like I expected. The guy texted me, saying he'd be at my place with the food in 10 minutes. This unsettled me a bit. I was under the impression he needed my phone number so he could call me and give better directions. But I just tried to brush it off. Around 10 minutes later, I would get another text saying he left the food on my doorstep. I went outside to get it and sent a text back thanking him. I figured that was that. But around midnight, I would get another text. It was the delivery driver. The text simply read, "I really liked your sweatshirt." This was now getting extremely weird, as the text suggested that the guy had stayed to watch me grab the food from my doorstep. I tried to play it cool and responded with something like, "Haha, yeah, thanks. It's pretty nice." I can't remember everything that was said next, but it was some string of multiple texts that were something along the lines of, "So how's your night going? What are you up to?" and various other seemingly harmless messages. To these, I didn't respond. At the end of the day, I told myself I didn't know this guy, and I had no obligation to keep a conversation going. So I just went to bed. But come morning, I would wake up to 20-something texts and multiple missed calls, all from the same number. It was again that same delivery driver. The last text was sent at 3 a.m., and as I scrolled through the texts, 2 in particular caught my eye. One of them read, "I'm outside your house," and the other said, "I can't see anything through your window. It's too dark." But that wasn't even the worst of it. I would later go outside to find footprints in the snow that I knew for a fact were not there the other day. Meaning, this guy wasn't joking. He had actually showed up to my house, and by the looks of the footprints, had walked around it multiple times. I've since moved, and haven't received another text from the number. That was the first and only time I will ever use a food delivery app. I'm 27 and currently out of work. I recently got laid off at my job, as the company I worked for was starting to go under. So, in an effort to keep up with the bills, I started delivering for Uber Eats part-time. A couple of my friends suggested it, and so I figured I'd give it a try until I found another job. To my surprise, it was actually good money. The only thing I didn't like was some of the places the app had me delivered to. I live in a city with a lot of sketchy areas. I try to stay away from those areas while delivering, but there's only so much you can do. This night, a Saturday, I got a McDonald's order. I usually don't accept those ones, but this night was strangely dead, which was weird. Saturday nights are usually the busiest for Uber Eats. Anyway, I pick up the order and start heading towards the address I'm given. Instantly, I realized it was not in the best area, but by this point, I decided to just suck it up. I pulled up to the house, and right away the vibe was off. It's completely dark with not a single light on in the house. Usually there's at least a light on upstairs, or something that would signal someone being awake and waiting for their order. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in park, turned off the engine, grabbed the order, and started walking towards the door. I walked onto the porch, and as I reached for the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open. I knocked, and as I did, the door opened slightly more. I yelled out that I had an Uber Eats order, and right away some man walked to the front door, like as if he had just been waiting right there. As he got closer, I got a good look at him. Now, I'm not one to judge a person by their physical appearance, but this guy was practically covered head to toe in tattoos. The guy looked extremely intimidating, definitely not someone you'd want to mess with. He had this look of frustration, or almost anger on his face. He was staring at me dead in the eyes. I lifted up the bag of food, and he grabbed it. The guy then started reaching in his pocket. I figured he was going to give me a tip. But no, before I knew it, the guy was holding a hunting knife and pointing it in my direction. My stomach dropped, realizing the situation I was now in. I was either going to get robbed for everything I had, or worst case scenario, killed. My mind was now racing. Thinking as fast as I could, I turned around towards my car, screamed at Derek to grab the gun, and put my hand in my pocket to start my car's engine from a button on the key. But there was no Derek, and I was in no way armed. But I figured if I could somehow convince this guy I was, I'd give myself a chance to get out of this. All I could do was pray that the threat, along with the vehicle starting, would be enough to convince this guy I didn't come here alone. And luckily it was. The guy shoved me back and slammed the front door. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I got out of there as fast as I could. I would of course end up calling the police, but I never heard anything back about whatever ended up happening. I assumed they didn't find anything, and that the guy was long gone by the time they arrived on scene. But I can't confirm this. If there's one thing I'm sure of, it's how fortunate I am to own a car with a remote proximity key, as I don't think the guy would have bought the whole act if I didn't start the engine. I still drive for Uber Eats every once in a while, but I've since started carrying a knife on me at all times.
The pandemic has been pretty hard on all of us, and we've all felt its effects in a variety of ways, but musicians have felt it more than most. I don't mean to throw myself a pity party or anything. I know there are older folks who are actually fearing for their lives, so I've counted my blessings plenty of times. But for most of my friends, the pandemic just meant working from home or taking a long paid vacation. For me, it meant work dried up entirely. As a professional musician, I've been playing music both solo and with bands for most of my adult life now. It's fun, but it can be really tough on occasion. And this pandemic has been the toughest time I've ever experienced. I had to do something, anything to pay the bills, so when the drummer in my band said that he was making some pretty decent money for working for Postmates, it immediately sparked my interest. I think the real selling point was how it had benefited his health. I needed the money, I needed it bad, and there were much worse things than delivering acai bowls that I could be doing. But being a delivery driver brought a whole host of new occupational hazards, and there was one particular incident in the summer of last year that I've thought about almost every single day since it happened. So, I get this one job delivering Thai food over to a place in Brentwood, just this little single-story house that barely stood out from the rest. Postmates has us doing the whole contactless delivery thing by that point, but I always used to hang around just to make sure whoever it was got their food.
Sometimes and I dropped the same name he'd used for his Postmates delivery. As soon as I say that, the cop stops dead in his tracks and turns around and sighs. That's when I know it wasn't just some home invasion or a car theft or something. That's when I knew it was darker than I could have imagined. The cop says something like, "Look, I'm sorry, but you're better hearing this from the next of kin. Besides, homicide doesn't have a full picture of what happened yet." "Is he okay? Is my uncle okay?" I ask. He was taken to the hospital, but after that, I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, sir. I had to do my own research to find out what exactly actually happened, and to me, it was way worse than home invasion or something. The older guy, the one who'd been so generous with his money and his advice, had a full-on mental breakdown the very same day that I brought him his food. From what I could gather, he'd been ranting and raving in his driveway, and then when the cops showed up, he waved a gun in their faces, and that's all she wrote. They shot him dead right there in his driveway. I don't know if he was trying to end his own life by cop, or he actually had some kind of mental breakdown. But if it all happened that same night I dropped his food off, then I basically fed this guy his last meal. The final thing that ever passed his lips. A couple of hours later, he was dead. I don't know why, but that messed with me something awful over the weeks that followed. I kept thinking that maybe if I'd stuck around, maybe if I asked him more about his problems or his life in general, maybe it'd have given him the strength to carry on, at least for a little while. Or maybe it was always going to happen. Maybe he planned it or something, and nothing I could have said would have made a difference. For the longest time, those were the kinds of thoughts that I just couldn't seem to shake. Like the guy was a ghost that just haunted me, no matter where I went, or what I did. On the night of the 27th of October, 2013, Tavisha Paris was working his final shift as a pizza delivery driver. The 25-year-old Sri Lankan migrant had moved to the UK to pursue a degree in IT and had long been employed as a delivery driver to support himself as he studied. But since he graduated with distinction from the University of Sheffield, Tavisha had quickly found himself a well-paid job in the IT sector. The generous pay package meant that it would be much easier to apply for permanent residence in the UK, which would open the door to eventually moving his family over too. His boss was sad to see the back of such a hard-working young man go, but also happy to see Tavisha moving onward and upward in his chosen career path. All he had to do was work one more shift, just one more night, and he'd be starting off his new life as a white-collar professional. At around 10 p.m., Tavisha would have been making one of his final runs of the night as he drove out to Southie Crescent with a customer's order. As he parked his car, unfastened his seatbelt, and opened the driver's side door, Tavisha was greeted by the looming figure of 25-year-old Kasim Ahmed. Kasim wasn't the one who... But 24 years seems like far too long. It's a sentence for someone willing to take the life of another human being for nothing more than a mobile phone. And it seems like the only justice for a person responsible for such a cruel, cosmic joke, who fabricated a scenario that would horrify all who heard it, deserves to go to prison for much,
much longer than just 24 years. Two stories stand out in my mind. I should note that I work day shift. These happened in broad daylight. It wasn't some spooky old haunted house at night. This stuff creeped me out in the middle of the day. So the first event goes down when I took a delivery to a nice big house in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. This middle-aged guy had to be in his late 50s or 60s, answers the door and invites me in while he goes to grab his wallet. Any other time, I'd have opted to stay outside on the porch, but the house was seriously impressive looking from the outside that I wanted to check out what kind of interiors it had going on. So I follow him to his back porch, but stop dead in my tracks when I notice the large TV screen that's playing some kind of hardcore adult movie. When he noticed I had stopped, and that it was making me uncomfortable, he didn't bother to apologize or turn it off. In fact, he seemed to like the idea that he was basically forcing me to watch something so sleazy, and beckoned me to come out onto the porch to join him. Naturally, I declined, got the money, and left. The other thing happened at an extended stay hotel that had a real bad rep, mostly from fellow delivery drivers who ended up getting robbed or jumped. So I follow the delivery instructions and head around to a side door where I find I actually needed a code to get in. Luckily, a guy sticks his head out of the window and says the pizza's for him, adding that he'll be right down to pick it up. As I'm waiting for the guy to let me in, someone else comes along and lets me in, so I ended up meeting the guy on the stairs. Now, rather than exchanging money and leaving as you might expect, the guy tells me he doesn't have the money. Some other guy back in the room has it and asked me to come upstairs with him. With the first red flag tingling in the back of my head, the elevator with him. The doors close and he says something to the effect of, "Hey, check this out," and begins to lift his shirt. Second and third red flags here. Under his shirt, he's been wrapped with bandages around his stomach. I'll save you the graphic details, but it was obviously a bad wound. A stab wound, if I had to guess. He proceeds to confirm that he was in fact stabbed the other night, and that it was on the news and that I might have seen it. And after a pause in the conversation, that it hurts a lot. With the most awkward silence ever, we step off the elevator and go to his room, and he pops inside before coming back to invite me inside. Now,
50% off everything online, plus 50% off deals in store this Wednesday through Monday.
Have you heard? Deals are popping. Spread the word. Prices dropping. We've got styles that slay, so get on your way. Stop at your Omega store today. Hello, why were you born? You're going to stay here forever.
Thoughts go through my mind. Either this is the dumbest setup for a robbery I'd ever seen, or the couch guy is really lazy. I eventually settle on the fact that if this were a robbery, the guy probably wouldn't have advertised this gaping stab wound, and I kind of wanted to meet the laziest man in the world. So I step in the door, careful not to let freshly mixed stab wounds get my back. Inside, there's an older white-haired man on the couch and a young tweaked-out girl. The man hands the money to the girl, and naturally, it's a $100 bill, and that's the only cash she has. So reluctantly, I make change for him out of my own money, conclude the transaction, and hastily retreat from what I can only assume was some kind of meth house. So, on the worst delivery shift I ever worked, it's snowing like crazy, and of course my hunk of junk car can't make it up the long residential street to the house at the very top of the hill. After several attempts, I had to face reality, so I got out to begin the walk about 2 or 3 blocks of the snowy road. I get to the large, normal-looking house and ring the bell. No answer, but I hear a guy yelling at someone inside. Knock, ring, no answer. Still yelling, but it's obvious he's yelling at someone on the phone. I can see that the door I'm at goes into a small mudroom with a door. Just got into a fight and lost by the looks of things. I see inside, and a half-empty bottle of Jack is chilling on the coffee table. I didn't order a pizza. It's probably Frank's, he says. Then the guy just turns and goes back into the living room and sits down to take another swig of Jack. Is Frank here? I ask. Yeah, he's upstairs. The guy points to a staircase just inside the door on the left. Okay, I think to myself. I guess I'll go give the pizza to Frank since Drunk Fighter isn't going to do anything besides get more drunk. I took 2, maybe 3, it's been years since this happened, steps up the stairs and thought, screw this. I immediately backpedal, go to the front door in the mudroom and leave the house and walk back to my car. I didn't call Frank because at that point I was just so livid about getting stuck in the snow, walking uphill through the snow, waiting a while for this drunk idiot to answer the door and getting sketched out. I figured if Frank wanted his pizza, he would call back or come pick it up. Frank never called to ask where his pizza was, and that made me more sketched out about the whole situation. Back when I was in community college, I worked at this pizza place that was basically in the middle of nowhere. It was located in a strip mall at the side of a highway in a pretty rural area, and there were just people dotted around the surrounded area that the store never quite went out of business. But since we hardly made any money, we operated a skeleton crew at all hours, and especially late at night. Sometimes it would just be 2 people in the store, me and one other guy. One would make the pies, and the other would drive them out to the customers. It wasn't always a perfect system, but we managed. Without a doubt, the best time to work was Wednesday because of how quiet it was. You worked a Wednesday or Thursday late shift and basically got paid to sit around on your butt and talk trash with your coworker. You'd maybe get 1 or 2 calls, nothing stressful, and that was that. But this one night, we get a call almost bang on 11 p.m., a half hour before closing. Any other time, we might actually be kind of angry, but it was just way too out of the ordinary for us to even be mad. Like, I think it was legit the first time we'd ever gotten a call that late. Now, at the time, my coworker is out in his car having a quick smoke before we start our clean down, so I'm all on my own when I hear the phone. Part of me was like, just don't answer it, dude. But honestly, curiosity got the best of me. Most of the families in the county work their farms, so they go to bed pretty early in the evening, so who was calling so late? When I pick up, I don't recognize the voice on the end. Given the nature of the job, I pretty much know everyone who calls, along with exactly what they're going to order. But still, it's not entirely unusual that we get someone new calling. But what was really unusual was how this guy's order differed from most others, not to mention how he was acting in general. So right off the bat, I can tell there's something not quite right with the guy. His voice was super raspy, like he lived in a whiskey still and smoked Marlboros for breakfast. And I know it's about to be a weird call when the first thing he asks for is a hamburger. I'm like, sir, this is a pizza place. I can read you our menu if you like. Which was no problem. We only had like 6 different pizzas with a couple of sides. The guy says it's fine. All he wants is hamburger meat. I'm assuming he meant on a pizza since we did actually do a cheeseburger pizza at the time, so I asked some clarification. But no, this guy doesn't want a pizza. He just wants hamburger meat. Raw hamburger meat. I don't even know if I'm allowed to sell raw hamburger meat. Like, I know you can eat raw hamburger meat, Like, I'm pretty sure that's what steak tartare is, but I figured there had to be some kind of food hygiene law against it. I asked my coworker, who was way too blazed to give me a solid answer, so I give the guy an honest answer and tell him I'm not even sure I'm allowed to sell him raw hamburger. The guy started begging and pleading so hard that I was actually speechless for a moment. He sounded like he was fiending for it, so bad that it was actually kind of creepy. I'm even less sure about the whole thing by that point, but after the guy on the phone offers a handsome tip, I make an executive decision and decided to go ahead with the sale. People do dumb stuff for money, right? Well, I suppose this is my thing. I throw what I consider to be $10 retail worth of hamburger meat into a plastic carton, plug this guy's address into my navigation system, then began the drive out to his house. I've been making deliveries in that area of Lawrence County for about 18 months at that time. I'm not saying I knew the place like the back of my hand, but I'd certainly never seen this guy's house before. I didn't even know that old place was there. It was some old farmhouse at the end of a long dirt road, and it looked like it was falling apart. It would have made a great haunted house, and all I could think as my headlights suddenly lit the whole place up was that it was like the start of a horror movie or something. I was the poor, dumb pizza boy, doomed to die in the film's intro that introduced whatever crazed killer or monstrous creature that was the movie's main feature. I park up, walk up the old rickety porch, and since there was no sign of a doorbell, I just knock on this guy's door. When he answers, he actually looks pretty normal. Like he'd expect some decrepit old witch to answer the door to a house like that. Not a guy in a sweater vest who looked like the dad of all dads. As I'm handing over the bag of hamburger meat, I can't resist asking him why he'd ordered raw hamburger and not an actual menu item. I figured he's going to grill it at home or whatever, so I frame my question as such. But the guy just smiles, shakes his head, and tells me he's going to eat it raw. I'm completely failed to hide the look of disgusted confusion on my face, because the guy then launches into this big speech about the benefits of eating raw meat. I mean, he talked a lot of science terms that I didn't understand, but he seemed to know what he was talking about, and it actually weirdly put me at ease for a second as he fished around his wallet for a tip. He hands me $11 in crumpled ones, and as I count them, I'm like, thanks, man. That's really generous. But then I look up, just in time to see the guy crack the lid on the plastic container of meat, bring it up to his nose, and take a long, deep sniff of what was inside. The way he acted wasn't like this wholesome, smells yummy kind of happy. It seemed straight up perverse. I'm just watching, trying not to freak out, as the smell of the meat seems to legit turn him on. After he huffs it, he shudders, eyes rolling in their sockets before he gets this glazed look in them, and all I'm thinking is, this is my cue to leave. I awkwardly thank the guy, just happy to get off of his property, only right as I go to turn around and walk back off the porch, I see something moving in the dimly lit hallway over the dude's shoulder. Poking out at about waist height from behind a door frame was this big pair of terrified eyes looking back at me from sunken sockets. It was a kid. I don't even know what compelled me to ask, but whatever it was so strong that it overrode any desire I had to flee while I still had the legs to carry me. I remember saying something like, that your kid, huh? Instead of giving me this big smile or waxing lyrical about what a proud dad they were, something that would have suited his wholesome sweater vest dad look, He suddenly looks furious. He spins around on the spot. The kid looks terrified and disappears from view. Then, when he turns back, he just stares at me. This deep, moody stare that sent a shiver down my spine. And once again, I get that overwhelming, this is my cue to leave feeling. I thank the guy, backing off the porch in a way where I never quite turn my back on him. He doesn't say a word in response, just keeps that angry look on his face, like I'd done something to offend him or seen something I shouldn't have. It took 20 minutes to drive back to the pizza place. 20 long minutes I had to replay the interaction in my head, over and over again. I called 911 as soon as I got back. Like I had no idea what was going on back there, but it couldn't have been good. No kid should be that scared of their dad, if that guy even was that kid's dad at all. My logic was that I could call 911, find out I just came out at a bad time and took the dude's actions out of context and maybe feel a little embarrassed. Or find out that something horrible was happening in that house, feel horrendous guilt that I failed to stop it, and then be haunted for the rest of my life. Though, what I wasn't expecting was that there was actually a third option, one that turned out to be worse than the first two. So, I called the cops. They go to check it out. Then the deputy gets back in touch to reassure me that he'd been over to the guy's house, had a good look around, and then found that there was nothing wrong. I figured that once a cop had told me that, I'd feel fine. Kind of stupid for assuming stuff, but generally fine. But I didn't. I found myself just not believing the guy. Like he couldn't have seen the same stuff that I had and just walked away being like, yeah, it's all good in that house. I didn't do another delivery to that house for the rest of the time I worked there. And I certainly wasn't complaining about not having to make any more weird deliveries. But even today, I find myself wondering what the deal was with that guy and his kid, and whether or not I should have done more to investigate. Because the thing that haunts me the most is that there might be some kind of kid out there going through the most horrifying ordeal of their young lives, thinking like, why didn't that man help me? Why didn't that man help me?
I've always gone out shopping on Black Friday for many years now. But 2 years ago was by far the scariest experience I've ever had. It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was excited to go buy a new TV. I was planning on going to Target for a big sale they were having on electronics, and they were opening at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I was at my parents' place, and they had over quite a few of our family members from my mom's side of the family. I chatted with all of them, and then had dinner with everyone. Then I left their house to Target to go buy a giant TV. I arrived at Target about 20 minutes before they opened. I saw that there was already a decent-sized line of people waiting to get inside. It wasn't too long, though, and I figured I still had a decent chance of getting the TV I wanted. I got out of my car and went to the back of the line, and as I did, I saw a few other people get in line behind me. I waited in line for the remaining minutes until I saw the doors to Target being unlocked. I watched as people started to go inside, then I walked quickly with everyone else, and once I got inside, I made a beeline for the electronics department. The store was really crowded, and it was hard to get through everyone, but I was able to make it there in a few minutes without running into anyone or anything like that. I got to the TVs to see a few people had already grabbed the size and brand that I had wanted, which was 50 inches. I walked quickly over to them, and just as I did, I saw another person grab one to reveal that there was just one more left behind it. I quickly reached out and got the last one. I was so happy to actually have it in my hands, because I had been pretty nervous I wouldn't be able to get it. I knew how quickly they would sell out. Probably 2 or 3 seconds after I had gained full control of it, someone came from my right side and grabbed the TV that I had in my arms. It started to come out of my hands until I grabbed it and pulled it back. At that point, the person shoved me a little bit and I almost gave up the TV. I turned and saw a man wearing a blue coat and a slight beard. He was looking at me, and as we made eye contact, he said that I had his TV. I said sorry to the man, but I had gotten the last one. The man started to turn and walk away, but then did a 360 turn and came back to me. He then asked me if I could please give it to him. I really didn't want to, and I said, no, I'm sorry. He then told me how he would have got to the TV sooner, but somebody had gotten in his way. Then he added he thought he had got to the TV before me as well. I knew the man was behind me, and I had got to it before him. He had tried to take it out of my hands after I already had it. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to give up the last TV to him, so I told him sorry one last time and started towards the check lanes. The man followed me all the way there, trying to reason with me. The more we walked, the angrier he became. It came to the point where I just started to ignore him. I finally got to the check lane, and he cursed at me and walked away. I checked out and walked my TV to my car in the parking lot and loaded it up. But as I was putting my TV in my car, I saw the man start to approach me once again. This time I got a bad feeling. It was a different environment out in the parking lot where there were less people around. I hurried up as fast as I could and then shut the door. The man was standing there from about 20 feet away, flipping me off. Then he got into a car that was parked nearby. I ignored him, and I actually felt kind of bad for the guy because I knew how great of a deal I was getting on the TV, but I also knew I didn't owe it to him to give him the last one. I started up my car. Seemed to be a little crazy to get so worked up over a TV. I brought my TV in the house, then I locked it up and went back to my parents for the rest of Thanksgiving. I stayed there until about 10 p.m., then drove back to my place. When I got there, I just felt suspicious. I was worried the guy had tried to break into my house or something when I was gone, but I figured I was just being paranoid. I looked around for my car at my place, and everything seemed fine, so I got out and headed for the front door. But as I made it to about 10 feet from my door, I noticed something. I had a couple of pillars in front of my house, and behind the side of the right pillar, I saw what appeared to be an arm. I knew who it had to be. I wanted to run away, but didn't want to make it obvious. I quickly stopped in my tracks, but said, "Forgot my phone," to myself. I was hoping this would work. Then I turned around and started walking back to my car calmly. The man seemed to buy it, and I wanted badly to run to my car, but I decided to remain calm. I didn't hear or notice the man moving at all, but when I reached about 10 feet from my car, I couldn't take it in. I broke into a sprint and ran the rest of the way. As I had reached my car, I heard the man now running after me. I got inside quickly and drove away as fast as I could. As I did, I felt something hit the car. It seemed like a rock. I drove back to my parents' place and told them everything. There was a decent-sized dent in the side of my car. I stayed there for the night, and we called the police as well. However, I don't believe the man was ever caught. But at least I never did hear from him again. This happened on Black Friday about 5 years ago. I was a young 19-year-old woman in my second year of college. I lived pretty close to my school, so I was able to work at a nearby clothing store, which was in a pretty big shopping center. I was scheduled to work on Black Friday, which I had done the year before. I knew it would be a long shift and really busy, but I also knew I was getting paid extra, so it was worth it. I got to work early on the morning of Black Friday. We opened at 6 a.m. and I was there. The store I worked at was pretty big, so we had a lot of people working. I was mainly a cashier, but I would also do other tasks as well. As I was working at the cash register shortly after we opened, a man came and checked out in my line. He was middle-aged and bald, and I remember he had a missing tooth in the front. As he was standing there, I could feel him just staring at me the whole time. Then he complimented me on my outfit and seemed to give off a bit of a creepy feeling, but I was nice to him and knew it was just part of the job. After that, he left. About an hour later, I moved from cashier to working in the women's department. As I was folding some clothes, I noticed the man once again. We were pretty busy, not enough where people were lined up outside or anything, but we were much busier than any other day. So I found it strange how I saw the same man once again about an hour later. But the part that I really didn't like is how I caught him just staring at me once again. When we made eye contact, he quickly looked away. It was as if he was almost hiding behind a rack of clothes. I did my best to mind my own business, and eventually the man was gone. About 10 minutes later, the man came back. I was still folding clothes and in the same area, but this time the man actually approached me.
Applying for jobs.
He asked me what I was doing after work. I didn't really give him an answer. I just said, I don't know. He then asked if I would go with him. I told him no, sorry, and then he grabbed onto my arm. He said we should just leave. This really took me by surprise, and I kind of yelled a little bit. I told him to stop grabbing me. At that point, there were a few people that noticed, and the man let go of me. He then walked away really fast. After that, I told a coworker, but the man was nowhere to be seen, so I thought he would be gone for good. But later on, probably 5 hours later, I saw him again, and he was staring at me. I was sure by now that the man was stalking me or something, and I was kind of concerned he would follow me when I left. I was getting off in about an hour, and I just hoped I wouldn't see the man when I was done. And I didn't, until 10 minutes before I was off, when I noticed him. I got a coworker to walk out to my car with me. The man didn't follow me, which was a huge relief, and I drove home. I got home, and thankfully the man didn't follow me. However, that night, I was awoken to a knocking at my front door. I lived with my parents at the time, but I knew it wasn't them or my younger brother because they were all asleep. I laid there confused at first, until I remembered the man who had been stalking me at the store. Then I got a really creepy feeling. I didn't want to get up or even look out the window. Thankfully, I heard the sound of my brother leaving his bedroom. He said out loud he wondered who was knocking on the door this hour as he walked. It was 2 a.m., and I guess my brother had still been up, most likely playing video games. I heard him get closer to the door, and at that point, I left my room to go over and join him in seeing who was there. As I did, my brother said to me there was nobody there. He then opened the door and stepped out. He looked around and picked up something off the ground, and then came back inside. Once inside, I saw he was holding an envelope. He opened it up and pulled out 2 Polaroid pictures. One of them was of my bedroom window, and the other was of the store that I worked at.
2 people here.
When I realized this, I just about had a heart attack. I explained the man to my brother, and I'm 100% sure he's the one who left the envelope. We both woke up my parents, and the police were called. I ended up filling out a report and answering several questions. I got the next few weeks off work, and to my surprise, the next day the man was found at the store once again and caught. On Black Friday of 2016, I went to Walmart to see the deals that they had. There were a number of things that I was interested in getting. Nothing too big like a TV, but a few small things and some Christmas gifts for people. I went there at about midnight, and the store was pretty busy. It was really weird to see a store that crowded at midnight. I looked around, but it was tough to get around the store with it being so crowded. At one point, I was back by the doors to the back room. They had a little window in them, and I randomly was just looking through it to the back rooms. As I did, I noticed someone walking into the back, but they were not a Walmart worker. They wore a ski mask and all black. I thought it had to be some sort of joke or something. There was a worker standing nearby, so I decided to let him know, I told him there was a guy in the back wearing a ski mask. He looked surprised and then asked me to show him where he was. I pointed in the window and he opened the door and asked me where. We both went inside the back room. It got a lot quieter back there as there were finally no crowds. I looked in the direction that the man went and I explained that he was walking that way. Just as I took a few steps in that direction, I felt someone grab me from behind and cover my eyes with their hand. They seemed to be wearing gloves. Then I felt someone else grab my legs, and next thing I knew, I was being picked up by at least 2 people. They carried me a little ways, and then dropped me into what felt like one of those big garbage cans on wheels. I fell onto a bag of garbage. I looked up and saw 2 men in ski masks. They started pushing me and told me to shut up. I wondered how this was going on with no employees seeing this. I couldn't see much, but I saw that we were passing by an open door leading to outside. I don't know what got into me, but at that moment, I felt there was something I had to do. So I jumped against the side, causing the garbage can that I was in to tip over. I fell out of it and got up and began running. I felt the men right on my heels, and once I made it out the door, I took a left for the front end of the store. We were at the side where there was no people, so I ran as fast as I could, and once I made it back to the front, the men stopped chasing me. I ran straight to my car and drove all the way home. Once there, I called the police. I know I should have called them sooner, but my mind was racing, and I was just desperate to get back home where I felt safe. By the time I called, however, I was told there had been other calls about the men in ski masks at that Walmart. I don't know what those men were up to, but I'm so happy I was able to get away. This was on Black Friday 4 years ago. It was in the middle of all the crowded Black Friday shopping going on. I had gone to Best Buy to look at computers. I was intending on buying a new laptop and possibly a desktop computer as well. They were probably the most popular thing that was going on sale there that day, so I got there a couple of hours early and waited in line. There was quite a few other people waiting, so I brought a chair and some hand warmers and just watched videos and played games on my phone as I waited. I remember there was a guy standing behind me who had short blonde hair. He was just standing there facing me but not really looking at me the entire time. At one point, I asked him how he was doing, but he didn't answer me. He didn't even look at me at all. The more time went by, it seemed awkward and just really strange as well. At last, finally, the doors to Best Buy were open and all the people rushed inside. I went to the computers and got the laptop I had been playing.
Get a little tired of listening to the reading. Oh, cool. Bye. Thanks for being here.